On March 21, 2023, a group of skiers crossing the northern section of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge came across a body on a hilltop at 5,600 feet elevation. The man was identified as a 53-year-old professional hunting guide from Fairbanks, who had been reported missing 4 months earlier. The cause of death was hypothermia. The case was closed. But that determination does not account for where he was found. It does not account for the condition of his body, and it does not account for the 4 months between when he disappeared and when he died. Because on the morning of November 3, 2022, the hunter had flown into a standard drop zone in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, a region he had worked professionally for over 30 years. His gear was packed. His route was familiar. He had done this dozens of times. He told his wife he would be back in 5 days. When he failed to return, search operations deployed across the region using established protocols. Professional teams covered the terrain systematically. The search continued for weeks. Methods that had located missing persons in comparable conditions found nothing. No tracks, no camp, no signal, no trace. Then 140 days later, there he was, 62 miles north of his last confirmed position, on a hilltop he had no documented reason to be on, in terrain that would have taken an experienced hiker 4 days to cross under optimal conditions. In November, in the Arctic. His clothes were on backwards. Both index fingers were missing. Surgically removed, the wounds fully healed. What follows is an examination of what the evidence shows and what it cannot explain. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge covers 19 million acres in the northeastern corner of Alaska. It is one of the largest protected wilderness areas in the United States and one of the most ecologically intact landscapes remaining on the continent. The Brooks Range runs through its southern section, rising to peaks above 9,000 feet. To the north, the coastal plain extends toward the Arctic Ocean across terrain that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. The refuge draws researchers, wildlife photographers, wilderness guides, and backcountry hunters from across the country. It is home to the porcupine caribou herd, one of the largest migratory herds in the world, which moves through the region in numbers that can reach into the hundreds of thousands during peak migration. Musk oxen range the coastal plain. Grizzly bears, wolves, and wolverines inhabit the interior. Golden eagles nest in the foothills. It is a functioning wilderness at a scale that is almost impossible to find anywhere else in North America. Access is limited but established. Charter flights operate regularly out of Fairbanks and several smaller communities, dropping hunters, researchers, and expedition teams at designated landing zones across the refuge. Satellite communication equipment is standard for anyone operating in the backcountry. The Alaska State Troopers maintain search and rescue coordination for the region, supported by the Alaska Army National Guard's aviation resources, which have conducted operations in this terrain for decades. Experienced professionals work this landscape every season. Hunting guides with decades of field time know the migration corridors, the river crossings, the weather patterns that move through the Brooks Range without warning. They carry emergency beacons. They file flight plans. They check in on schedule. The infrastructure supporting backcountry operations in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is not casual. It is the product of generations of experience in an environment that punishes error without hesitation. The man at the center of this account was exactly that kind of professional. He had guided hunters in this specific region for more than 30 years. He knew the terrain with a precision that comes only from sustained, repeated presence in a place over a very long time. He was not someone who made careless decisions in the field. His colleagues described him as methodical, prepared, and deeply familiar with the risks specific to Arctic wilderness work. The conditions on November 3, 2022, when he flew into his drop zone, were cold but manageable, approximately -15 degrees Fahrenheit, clear skies, standard early November conditions for the region. Nothing about the day was unusual. Nothing about his preparation was unusual. He waved as the charter plane lifted off. That was the last confirmed visual contact anyone had with him alive. Within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, disappearances are not unheard of. The terrain is unforgiving. Weather systems develop and intensify faster than forecasts can track. A single navigation error in conditions of reduced visibility can separate a person from their camp, by distances that become difficult to recover. These are documented, understood risks, factors that experienced operators account for, and that the search and rescue system is designed to address. But within the documented record of disappearances in the broader Alaska Triangle region, a corridor stretching roughly from Juneau in the southeast to Barrow in the north, and anchored by the interior wilderness, a specific category of cases has accumulated that resists the standard framework. Not cases where experienced people made understandable errors in difficult conditions. Cases where the sequence of documented facts produces contradictions that standard explanations cannot resolve. The case of the hunting guide who disappeared on November 3, 2022 is one of those cases. The hunter's camp was found on November 10th, 7 days after his scheduled return. It was located approximately 4 miles east of the drop zone, in a valley between low hills near a frozen lake, roughly half a mile in diameter, a reasonable campsite for a man planning to work the surrounding terrain for several days. The tent was pitched correctly and zipped shut. A camp stove sat beside it, with the remnants of a meal frozen in the pot. His rifle, a bolt-action chambered in .300 caliber, was leaned against a low spruce tree with the safety engaged. The food cache was hanging undisturbed from a branch in the standard bear precaution configuration. Everything in the camp was in the position of a person who had organized their gear with care and then stepped away. Inside the tent, the sleeping bag was unfolded as though someone had slept in it and risen. His boots were placed on top of it, heavy insulated winter boots, size 11, the kind of footwear that represents the difference between survival and frostbite in conditions below zero. Standard practice before sleep. Expected. What was not expected was the second pair of boots sitting at the tent entrance. Identical boots. Same model, same size, same degree of wear, the same scuffs on the toe caps, the same abrasion pattern on the soles, the same discoloration from field use. Not a spare pair with different wear characteristics as a careful operator might carry. An exact duplicate in every detail of aging and use. The tracker assigned to the search party examined both pairs closely. He had worked searches in this region for over 2 decades. He had no explanation for what he was looking at. His GPS navigator was in his pack. The battery was dead. His satellite phone was also dead. Both pieces of equipment had been functioning at his last contact point, and both carried spare batteries, also found in the pack, also dead. This simultaneous failure of multiple independent power sources was noted and logged. No explanation was determined. Outside the tent, the snow around the camp had been partially smoothed by wind, but approximately 20 feet from the entrance, a set of footprints was visible. Bare human feet, size 11, moving east toward the lake in a straight line. No deviation, no hesitation. No sign of a person stopping to orient themselves or reconsider direction. The stride was even and measured at approximately 30 inches between prints, consistent with a person walking at a deliberate, unhurried pace, in -15-degree conditions, barefoot. The tracks followed a direct line to the lake shore and continued onto the ice. The search party followed them. The ice measured 18 inches thick, solid, structurally sound, incapable of concealing a fall-through without leaving evidence. The tracks continued to the center of the lake, approximately 400 feet from shore, and stopped. The last left footprint was clear and complete. Nothing followed it. No disturbance in the snow, no other tracks, no evidence of any transition from walking to any other state. The surface beyond the final print was undisturbed. The search party walked the entire perimeter of the lake. They surveyed the opposite shore. They found no continuation of the tracks, no sign of anyone emerging from the ice, no additional footprints in any direction. Aerial survey of the surrounding terrain produced the same result. He had walked barefoot into the center of a frozen lake in the Arctic in November, and then he was simply not there. Official search operations continued for 3 weeks before being suspended, due to deteriorating conditions and approaching polar winter. The case was classified as missing, presumed dead from exposure. The details of the tent, the boots, the battery failures, and the tracks ending on solid ice were noted in the file and not formally reconciled with the official determination. His family did not accept the ruling. A private search team was retained when conditions improved in spring, but found nothing further before the ground froze again. On March 21, 2023, 4 months and 18 days after his disappearance, a 4-person ski expedition traversing the northern section of the refuge climbed a hill at approximately 5,600 feet elevation, 62 miles north of the lake where the footprints had ended. One of the skiers noticed a dark shape in the snow near the summit. It was the hunter. He was lying on his back, arms extended, legs together, in a position of complete physical relaxation. Not the position of someone who had collapsed from exhaustion or disorientation, but the position of someone who had lain down deliberately. His clothing was intact and complete. Thermal base layer, fleece mid-layer, insulated parka, pants, gloves, hat. He was fully dressed for the conditions. His clothes were on backwards. The jacket zipper ran down his spine. The pant pockets sat at the front of his thighs. His thermal underlayer was inside out. Every garment had been reversed, not partially, not accidentally, but completely and consistently. The medical examiner removed his gloves at the scene. Both index fingers were absent. Right hand, no index finger. Left hand, no index finger. The amputations had been performed cleanly, through the middle joint, with a single motion of a sharp instrument. The wound margins were smooth and even. The surrounding tissue showed no infection, no inflammation, no sign of a healing process still in progress. The skin over the stumps was smooth and faded, scars that had fully matured. The healing visible in those wounds represented a minimum of several weeks of recovery time under normal physiological conditions. The hunter had possessed all 10 fingers when he departed on November 3rd. His disappearance had lasted approximately 4.5 months. If the amputations had occurred immediately after his disappearance, standard wound healing timelines would place full scar maturation at 6 to 8 weeks, which falls within the window of his absence. But the tissue condition observed by the examiner at the scene suggested healing that had been completed well before the time of death, not concurrent with it. The cause of death was hypothermia. Time of death based on tissue condition and decomposition analysis was estimated at 2 to 3 weeks before discovery, meaning late February or early March, not November, not December. He had been alive for approximately 3.5 months after disappearing, somewhere in the Arctic winter. The full autopsy produced additional findings that the official report could not reconcile. His stomach contained partially digested food, caribou meat, Arctic berries including cloudberries and cranberries, and plant root material of a species not immediately identified by the laboratory. The food had been consumed approximately 12 hours before death. Berries do not persist above the snow line in February in interior Alaska. Caribou migrate south and are largely absent from the northern refuge during winter. The food in his stomach had been obtained and consumed in conditions where obtaining it should have been impossible. He showed no frostbite. None. Not on his face, not on his extremities, not on the skin of his hands. A person exposed to Arctic winter conditions without shelter for any significant duration accumulates frostbite injuries that are unmistakable in autopsy. His skin showed only the general cooling associated with death from hypothermia, not the tissue damage of extended cold exposure. He had been kept warm for months in the Arctic winter, and then he had not been. The FBI was requested to review the case due to the nature of the physical findings. An agent with experience in anomalous disappearance cases examined the full record. He noted the parallels with other documented cases in the broader Alaska region. Cases involving experienced wilderness operators who vanished without conventional explanation, whose remains were found at distances inconsistent with reasonable movement, and whose physical condition at recovery contradicted standard survival timelines. The agent's assessment noted that no rational framework currently available accounted for all documented elements of the case simultaneously. He recommended the file be maintained as open. It was instead closed as death by exposure, with anomalous circumstances noted. 3 months after the burial, the hunter's family received a package at their Fairbanks address. No return address, postmarked from a small community approximately 100 miles south of the refuge. Inside were two items. The first was a pair of insulated winter boots, size 11, identical in model, size and wear pattern to the two pairs found in the tent. A third pair, matching in every detail. The second was a sealed transparent container holding two human fingers preserved in formalin. DNA analysis confirmed they belonged to the hunter. Postal records traced the package to a small post office in the community of origin, sent on a specific date in early May, paid for in cash with no identifying information captured on available surveillance. The investigation produced no suspect, no lead, and no further evidence. The boots and all three pairs remain in evidence. The fingers are with the family. The case is closed. It does not stand alone. The Alaska State Troopers database contains 3 additional disappearance cases from the broader Arctic National Wildlife Refuge region over the preceding 20 years that share specific characteristics with this one. Each involved an experienced wilderness operator. Each involved a recovery location that contradicted the last known position by a margin inconsistent with reasonable movement. Each involved physical findings at recovery that did not align with standard survival and decomposition timelines. In 2 of the 3, personal items found at the original camp showed anomalies: duplicate equipment, dead batteries, disturbed gear with no evidence of intrusion. None of the 4 cases were formally linked in the official record. Each was handled as an individual event. Approximately half a mile west of the hilltop where the hunter was found, a private investigator retained by the family documented a circular area of ground, approximately 30 feet in diameter, where the low tundra vegetation showed significant damage, blackened, as if exposed to sustained heat or energy from directly above. Soil samples from the circle showed radiation levels above background, but below established thresholds for human health concern. They also showed the presence of a chemical compound that the testing laboratory was unable to identify against its reference database. The investigator noted that weather records for the preceding 6 months showed no lightning strikes in the area and no documented fire activity. Natural radiation sources in the region do not produce the localized pattern observed. The circle's origin was not formally investigated by any government agency. The Alaska Triangle, the corridor of wilderness stretching across the state's interior and northern reaches, has produced a documented record of disappearances that exceeds statistical expectations for the population and activity levels of the region. Researchers who have compiled these cases note consistent patterns: experienced operators, not novices; recovery locations that require explanations of movement that available evidence cannot support; physical anomalies at recovery; clothing reversed, body parts absent, survival timelines contradicted, that appear across cases with no connection to each other except geography and the category of facts that resist standard accounting. What took this hunter to the center of a frozen lake and then returned him, months later, 62 miles north and several thousand feet higher, missing 2 fingers, dressed backwards, with food in his stomach that should not have been obtainable? That question has no answer in the official record. To this day, nobody knows. 4 cases in the documented record of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge region share the same structural characteristics: experienced operators, recovery locations that contradict last known positions by margins that available movement evidence cannot bridge, physical findings at recovery, reversed clothing, absent body parts, healed wounds, survival timelines that do not align with the period of disappearance, that appear consistently and independently across cases spanning 2 decades, simultaneous equipment failures at camp, personal items that duplicate in ways that have no documented explanation. The pattern is not in the interpretation, it is in the facts themselves, as they were documented and recorded at the time. Standard explanations account for some of what the record shows. The Arctic wilderness is genuinely dangerous. Navigation errors occur, equipment fails, the cold is capable of producing death with very little warning. These factors are real, and they apply to the broader context of wilderness incidents in Alaska every year. They explain the majority of what happens to people who enter this landscape unprepared. They do not explain the boots. They do not explain the tracks ending on solid ice. They do not explain amputations performed with surgical precision, whose wounds had fully healed before the man died. They do not explain 4 months of survival in Arctic winter with no frostbite and food that was not seasonally available. They do not explain the package delivered to a family 3 months after a burial, containing the preserved remains of what had been removed. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge remains open. Expeditions depart from Fairbanks every season. Charter pilots continue their routes. Hunters, researchers, and wilderness travelers enter the refuge in numbers consistent with historical patterns. The vast majority return on schedule with the experiences they came for. The infrastructure supporting backcountry operations continues to function as designed. Within that functioning system, the specific category of cases documented here continues to accumulate, not frequently, not predictably, but consistently across years and across the full geographic range of the triangle. Cases appear in the record that share the same characteristics and resist the same explanations. The facts continue to accumulate. The explanations continue to fall short. And the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge continues to receive visitors into terrain where the documented becomes difficult to reconcile with the expected. If this examination was useful to you, consider supporting the channel by liking and subscribing. New documentaries are released regularly, each following the same measured, evidence-based approach. If you have documented cases, regional knowledge, or relevant material related to disappearances in Alaska or the broader Arctic wilderness, you are welcome to share it in the comments. The record is incomplete. Careful attention is sometimes the only thing that moves it forward. The wilderness remains, the pattern persists, and the distance between what happened and what should have happened has not closed.